And good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many of you joining this session. I Just before a lot of you joined, there was a nice little video montage that Karen put together with some backing music. So some of you will have heard the music and seen the montage. Those of you who are more recently joined won't have seen that, unfortunately. But it reminded me of something that happened to me recently. I went to see Antonio Romeo, the new cabinet secretary, give a talk last Friday. It's an in-person event, not virtual like this one, in-person event. And there was like kind of swirling lights, and and we're now allowed to introduce new cabinet secretary Antonio Romeo, and she came on stage to a track, a music, Montel Jordan, "This Is How We Do It." And she came on and she said, "I hope you like my walk-on music." And it made me realize that never in my entire life of giving talks have I ever had walk-on music. And I was wondering whether I could get walk-on music for today. And then I realized you wouldn't really have walk-on music because I'm not really walking on. It's like sit-down music. And then I thought, well, what would be my sit-down music for this virtual talk? And all I could come up with was Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. So what I'm going to ask you to do, all of you listening, is so whilst you're hearing me talk, thinking what would have been a better choice for walk-on music than Under Pressure? What would be something which would fit the theme of the talk and would work? So hold that in your mind whilst I start to talk about trustworthiness under pressure. What I'm really going to talk about is the work that analysts do and how we as analysts can be our best selves, and really the mindset that we need to nurture as analysts to thrive in an environment of trustworthiness under pressure. And by mindset, what do I mean? I mean kind of the philosophy, the approach, our guiding star, the guiding values. So that's what I'm going to talk about, what that mindset in an environment of trustworthiness under pressure needs to be. And as we go through, I'm going to mention various things, various kind of documents are going to crop up. So I'm going to create a framework out of various components. One of them, which will be no surprise to anybody who's heard me talk before, will be the Code of Practice for Statistics, talking about trustworthiness, quality, and value. But I'm also going to draw on a really fantastic blog written by Polly Mackenzie. Polly is a thinker about public policy, and she recently wrote a blog that I loved called The Flawed Metaphor of Levers, or The Levers Don't Work. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to pick up on something that Fiona Fox said. Fiona Fox is the head of the Science Media Centre, and she talked about science in an age of misinformation. And Fiona talked about flooding the zone. And I'm also going to talk about a blog that David Spiegelhalter wrote for the Office for Statistics Regulation. It's on our website, where he argued incredibly persuasively about the importance of pre-bunking, not the debunking things which are wrong, but pre-bunking. So I'm going to talk about David's blog as well. Before I get into the meat of it, just a few words about the Office for Statistics Regulation that I head up. We are the UK's statistics standard setter. We do three things. We look at how statistics are produced by government bodies. We do that by awarding the official statistics accreditation, but we also reach way beyond that into lots of other work that analysts do. We provide, for example, guidance on good practice in modeling. So that's the first thing, I guess, the core of what we do. We also think about the social value of statistics data and analysis. And we have a really good program of research that really unpacks the ways in which good analysis, good statistics serve the public good. And then probably the most high profile thing that we do, and maybe what we're most known for, is statistics go out into the world. They are used in public debate. And we are very assiduous and fierce in protecting those statistics from misuse. And I've just got a couple of screenshots there of headlines of things that we've done in the last couple of years around statistics being misused. And in fact, we are going to make an intervention today at 2 o'clock involving a statement by the leader of the opposition, which we considered was a misuse of statistics. So keep an eye out for that this afternoon. Everything we do is underpinned by TQV, trustworthiness, quality, and value. And the essence of TQV is realizing that any form of analysis, any form of statistics, not simply numbers. They're numbers that emerge from organizations that are trustworthy. They have people and management and governance that creates an environment of integrity. The numbers must have quality. They must have sound methods, appropriate data, and they must have value. They must support society's needs for information. It's not enough simply to have numbers because we've always done it this way. They've got to confer value. So that's TQV. And that's really the end of the introduction. Just what we do and how we're underpinned by TQV. So let's get into the meat of it. Why have I chosen to speak about analysis under pressure? Now, those of you who are analysts might think that what's about to follow is something about budgets or resource pressure. And I don't mean to downplay that, but I'm looking for sort of much more systemic explanations of why analysis feels under pressure, sort of features of the environment in which analysis in government takes place. And I've got 5 features of that environment that I'm going to talk about. The first is a pervasive tendency in political discourse to weaponize analysis. Probably the first time this notion of weaponization really emerged in public consciousness was in the referendum on exiting the EU, and the very famous, I've got an image of it here, very famous statistic number, which was pasted on the side of a bus. It became very controversial, but it was, I think, a prime example for me of weaponizing, picking a number, repeating it over and over again, taking it out of its context, sort of hammering it home in an attempt to kind of really persuade and secure an argument. This is pervasive. I've got 3 examples here, but if you look at the work that we do in OSR, you'll see that very large amounts of our work involves responding to situations where a piece of analysis, a statistic, a number, a forecast, a modeling output has become weaponized and therefore started to be misleading. So in the 2024 election, many of you will remember this. There were a couple of weaponized claims. The 2 main parties were at it. I've got the quote from the Conservatives there and also from Labour. These were numbers they picked and repeated over and over again. We looked into this actually during the general election, and we set out the conclusion, as I've got here, that those uses lack transparency. More recently, we've looked at a claim that the Scotland, the water pollution in Scotland is worse than in England, and some numbers were put forward to support this. We thought this was very selective use and also very unclear sourcing, and this sort of weaponization of these numbers to make this claim had the potential to mislead. And a very common form of weaponization that we're seeing in the current elections in Scotland and Wales are health comparisons between the performance of NHS in Scotland and in Wales and England. I've got a particular example there, but this is so widespread. We actually last week published a statement emphasizing that those comparisons are very misleading because of different operating structures in the different NHS systems in different parts of the country. So these are examples of the weaponization of analysis. What I think this means, the implication, the impact on analysis is that analysts face a demand for the killer fact, the fact that is going to then become weaponized. And I think that can really adulterate, can really weaken the benefits and the value of analytical work. So challenge 1, under pressure 1, weaponization. The second challenge is what I call the lump of data fallacy. And this is the fallacy that data, bits of analysis, a forecast, a model, a statistic are kind of fixed, firm objects that can be taken and used into policy like a lump of coal is put into a furnace and just be burned up and used. It's a fallacy because any of us who work with analysis know that the numbers which emerge from an analysis are never as firm and as fixed as that. And I've got two quotes here on the side, which are really not from policymakers. They're from, not from at least departmental policymakers, but they're from people who've said things to me at various points in the past. One is from a CEO of a financial services firm who was talking about survey data on the state of the economy. And he said, I don't want soft numbers from a survey, I want a hard number like GDP. Now, of course, anybody who knows anything about GDP would know, firstly, it's got a very significant component of survey numbers within it. But secondly, it's also very far from being a hard number. It's not this fixed hard lump of solidity that he was imagining. It's a much more contingent and uncertain number. And then the second quote is from quite a well-known macroeconomist that I was talking to him about classifications, the way in which economic activity is classified. And I was making the case that there may need to be some revisions here. And he had a panicked look on his face. So what's going to happen to my time series? Again, thinking that at the numbers are fixed points stretching back into the past, and any kind of change to that would like really upset this kind of fixed notion of data. The impact on analysis of this lump of data fallacy is that analysis can be made to carry a weight it can't bear. So this is the second under pressure thing, this lump of data fallacy. The third form of pressure on analysis is a really kind of rampant demand for data, and in particular for data packaged into dashboards. I think this has been around for some time. It was turbocharged by the pandemic due to the really incredible success of a very positive thing, which was the coronavirus dashboard. I've got a screenshot from it there, hugely accessed by citizens, hugely informative, really amazing piece of work. But I think that led to a desire in government, a desire in policymakers to adopt dashboards. It sort of looks contemporary, it looks quite with it. It looks like kind of commercial. It's got some commercial delivery kind of drive to it. I think it provides a sugar rush of immediate information. But as we know, sugar rushes fade quite quickly. And I think dashboards can provide policymakers with the illusion of control. Put something in a dashboard and it feels like you've got, dashboards are after all something which are presented to pilots when pilots are, flying planes, or drivers when they're driving cars, where the pilot or the driver are in control. So dashboards have got this sort of sense of like, yeah, we can really control something. I think this is a real problem for analysts, and it creates pressure because I think there's an awful lot of effort going into creating dashboards that aren't actually used, or it's certainly not used as much as the effort implies. So this is an under pressure thing on analysis, is to create this form of digestible information, which may not always be terribly well used despite the demand. So that's the third. The fourth, I mentioned Polly already. This is Polly Mackenzie and her wonderful Substack blog, There Aren't Any Levers. And she was talking about this tendency for people in government, civil servants, senior civil servants, politicians, to say the levers of government don't work. And indeed, the Prime Minister said a couple of months ago, every time he said, I put on a lever, I realise it's not connected to anything. And Polly Mackenzie took this metaphor of levers and said, actually, it's a failed metaphor. Why? Well, because government is not a machine. Government is not a mechanical construct. It's a very, very complex set of relationships and systems and interactions between the state, citizens, companies, charities. It's a distributed network phenomenon. And in particular, Polly said it doesn't work because levers imply linearity, and most policy is not in a linear context. Levers assume sole agency, that the person at the top is the sole actor, whereas we all know as analysts that there are millions of actors in most policies, actors called citizens. She said levers belong to machines, not to living systems. Levers reinforce hierarchy. Levers ignore citizens as actors. And finally, and I think this is rather pointed, she said, complaining about levers is a sort of performative frustration. It's not a real frustration; it's a performance of frustration of not of sort of being able to secure the results that you want. So it's a great blog. I'd really recommend you read it. What's the impact on analysis? Well, I'd say the impact on analysis is that analysis can be seen as part of a mechanism of control, part of this linear, sole agency, machine-like view of policy, and that really undermines the value that really good analysis can provide in looking at a problem or looking at potential solutions. Right, so those are 4 ways in which analysis is under pressure. There's a 5th way, which is a bit different. So the first 4 ways, in a sense, are kind of within government. They're endogenous to government. They're about the way government is constructed and how people in government think, and therefore how people in government might lean on analysis. By leaning on analysis, place undue pressure. The 5th sort of pressure is exogenous. And there's very many different ways to tell this story. People talk about polarization, they talk about misinformation, they talk about disengagement or failing trust in institutions. The way I think about this societal layer is that trust is evolving. So scholars of trust talk about trust involving 3 distinct components. It's the competence of the organization being trusted. Can they do the job? The integrity, is the organization honest? And benevolence, does the organization serve the interests of others, in this case, citizens? So competence, integrity, benevolence. Now, if you look at it like that, I think you can start to see not trust in decline, but trust shifting away from institutional and vertical ideas of trust being reposed in institutions like the state, like church, like charities, like companies, and into something which is much more horizontal and about human relations, much more about shared values, about community, about connection, about bonds, and so on. And something that's a very fluffy way of put that, but in a way that's what's going on with a degree of polarization is trust within shared value groups. Now, if that's right, that second box, the horizontal and relational, competence and integrity are much less important. They're sort of institutional characteristics than benevolence. Benevolence becomes much more important, showing that you've got others' interests at heart. Why is that an impact? Why is that a pressure on analysts? Well, analysts can be seen as remote and distant, can be seen as part of the box of institutional and vertical authority, not horizontal and relational. And much the rest of my presentation is how can analysts recover that trust by building in something which is more relational and open. So that's sort of the problem. Those are the 5 reasons why I think analysis is under pressure. What are the tools available for analysts to respond? Well, the standard way we think as analysts is to really focus down on competence and integrity, to focus in on the things that make us credible and professional and rigorous. The Green Book, the Magenta Book, 2 really important foundational documents in the analysis function. Obviously, the Code of Practice for Statistics that we're responsible for in OSR, the analysis function standards, and supported by institutions that really kind of underpin those sets of standards. Again, my organization, OSR, does that. We are part of the kind of framework of competence and integrity, but there's also the evaluation task force, the analysis function. I could have put on here the professional structures like the Government Social Research Service and the Government Economic Service. That's all about competence and integrity. I think what that means is that analysts can often convey work a bit like the Bank of England conveys itself. This is a photograph of the Bank of England. The architecture is deeply encoded with strong signals. There's a flag at the top telling you it's a national institution. There are pillars which says this is a strong structure. There's a very, very solid base there. It's all kind of crying out competence, integrity, solidity, sort of deep authority. And that's how analysts, I think, can often convey their work, how we as analysts can often convey our work. I think it's problematic, though, because of the evolving nature of trust. If what people trust is no longer competence and integrity, but benevolence and connection and relationship, well, analysts might be doubling down on the wrong thing by focusing on competence and integrity and talking about standards and talking about professional rigor. Those things are important. They're necessary, but they're definitely not sufficient to withstand the pressures that analysts are under. So what is the answer? And this is the heart of my argument in this talk, is that as analysts, our secret sauce has to be openness and humility. And just before I unpack that, let me bring in Fiona Fox, the head of the Science Media Centre. This is the second of the 3 really wonderful blogs I wanted to bring to your attention. So Fiona Fox was writing about public attitudes and the communication in an era of misinformation. And Fiona, towards the end of this really excellent piece, says, misinformation will thrive if we don't flood the public sphere with the measured, accurate evidence that the public is asking for. And for those of you who are real students of political discourse will know the phrase flood the zone she's borrowing that phrase from US politics, which I won't go into, but it's quite interesting that she's repurposing that for a very positive way of saying if you want to combat misinformation, you have to flood the public sphere with really, really good stuff. Flood the public sphere with good, accurate evidence. The question is how to do that. How do you flood the public sphere with good stuff? And my argument in a nutshell is openness and humility. Openness and humility are the secret sauce and analysts that can withstand the pressures and that can thrive in this environment. And to some extent, I'd really like to stop here. I'd really like to stop my presentation with openness and humility, because I think for me that says it all. But I do recognize that I need to put some flesh on these bones. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes just walking through a few examples of how to embody openness and humility in analytical work, and to recognize these are not an exhaustive list of examples, but they're just to kind of add some color to this key concept. Code of practice is very strong on this. It contains the essence of principles for trustworthy communication, present data and statistics objectively, describe the quality of data and statistics, including uncertainty. Don't use statistics in a misleading way, don't cherry pick, and take proactive steps to prevent misuse. That brings me on to the third blog I want to talk about, taking proactive steps. This is the very great David Spiegelhalter. He wrote a blog on our website, the OSR website, called Don't Ask for Trust in Statistics, Earn It. And he said, I feel particularly strongly it's not enough to suggest what the statistics mean. It is also vital to say what they do not. This could be thought of as preempting misunderstanding, but also could pre-bunk misinformation, getting in there early before false claims start circulating. And just as a plug, David will be speaking at the end of Analysis in Government month on the 28th of May. And I mean, he is such a magnificent speaker. I suggest you all join to hear him say a bit more about this. One of my favourite examples of pre-bunking in practice is the indices of multiple deprivation for England, which includes this box. How can the IOD be used? Ticks for the things it can be used for and crosses for things it can't be used for. To me, that is so helpful in minimizing the risk that somebody might inadvertently or deliberately misuse the indices of multiple deprivation. I think it is a great example of pre-bunking, and it's so much better than when people say this analysis should be used with caution, which I don't really know what that means. I know what this box means. You can compare small areas across England, but you can't quantify how deprived a small area is. Really, really helpful. I want to come on to quality. So I mentioned TQV already. It's 3 lenses to view analytical work: trustworthiness about the organization, value about supporting society's needs, and quality. Quality has three principles within it: prioritizing a quality culture, using suitable data sources and methods, and thereby being rigorous, and being open about quality, explaining the quality of statistics, including strengths and limitations. One of my favorite examples of being open about quality is from the ONS's 2021 census, where what they did was compile the census estimates, and then they invited in local authorities, in a sense, to kind of stress test the figures for each local authority. They got controlled early access. The local authorities came in. They could look at inconsistencies. They could look at what locally held sources of intelligence said, and that was used to validate, really extensive quality assurance process here. 255 organizations involved one way or another. It's a great example of openness. It's not the kind of competence and integrity of like, we've got the best methods. It's the openness of saying, you out there might know more than we do. And there's a humility in that too. The only thing I'd just say, just as an aside, is that I think sometimes I would encourage the ONS to have the courage of its convictions in this kind of methodology of openness. It doesn't always do that. Final example I want to give is intelligent transparency. This is standards that we've published for the public use of statistics data and wider analysis. It's all about how analysis is used in speeches, in publications, in white papers, in policy documents. And it needs to have a quality of access. It needs to support understanding and decision-making and leadership. And my favorite example of that is actually the Treasury's budget document. When the Chancellor delivers the budget, every number she uses is captured in a budget data sources document. And the Treasury say at the beginning of that document, which it's a great resource, but they do it to comply with the standards of intelligent transparency. To me, it's incredibly open. It's an incredibly open way of making the budget accessible for people to scrutinize and understand. So that's my argument. Openness and humility are fundamental for analysts to thrive in an environment of trustworthiness under pressure. Just before I open up to Q&A, and we actually have a couple of polls, I want to give a summary of what I'm saying. But I recognize that all of you on this call will have different learning styles. So I've got 4 different summaries equating to different learning styles. So if you are someone who really likes a structured roadmap, a kind of a pathway through what's being said, something that you can follow in a really clear way, here is the summary. We've got some challenges. Those challenges have an impact on analysis. Unfortunately, we know that technocratic distance doesn't work, but there are a selection of things that will work around trustworthy communication, pre-bunking, and so on. So I will come back to this structure so that you can absorb it a bit more. But if you want the kind of the roadmap, that's the roadmap version. If by contrast you're a kind of empirical person, things make sense to you when you work through actual examples, you want to build from the bottom up, here are the examples that I suggest you go and look at those, and you form your own view as to how they are exemplifying openness and humility. My third style is probably the one which is closest to the way I personally think, which is I like a kind of a logical flow. And the logic of this talk, and I'm going to give some praise to my colleague Sophie Nixon, because this is a slide she produced some time ago that I've repurposed for myself. So it's a really nice way of summarizing. If analysis is under pressure and a very technocratic authority doesn't work, then analysts need to focus on trustworthy communication through openness and humility. That's the logical chain of what I'm saying. But you might be someone who just likes something really bite-sized. You just want to come down to a single key message. And for you, if that's your learning style, this is my summary. Focus on openness and humility. But I am conscious that's something I've said quite a few times. So I hope I've drilled that in. I want to close with something that David Spiegelhalter said, which I think is probably a nice summary of the spirit of my talk. So David said at the end of his blog that he wrote for us, what he said was, through all of this work, trustworthy communication, openness, humility, through all of that, there's another really important thing. Another really important thing analysts must remember. That's don't be dull. All I'm going to say, I'm going to now go to the sort of audience participation part of the talk. So what I suggest is we begin with a couple of polls, and then we'll open up to Q&A. I think, Karen, you've got the first poll. I already prefigured this one, so you should be ready to answer this one. Karen, do you want to get going through it?
I can, yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Ed. So yeah, this is the first poll. So this one's a word cloud, everyone, and you've had, like Ed says, a little while to think about your answer for this. So we talked about walk on music, but what should the sit down music have been for this presentation? I've had a few ideas in the chat already, but yeah, drop your ideas in there, and we shall try and tailor Ed's next event so you have the correct music at the introduction for you. I think I've seen Policy of Truth by Depeche Mode, obviously Under Pressure.
Oh man, and it's not only choice. Is it on money, it's a great track as well. It's a great track. That would definitely and it sort of fits my age as well.
People suggesting Charlie XCX, Karma Police, Radiohead.
Yeah, I mean, people often say that my organization is the stats police. So I don't know if that's what that Karma Police is driving at.
Oh, and we've got lots of questions as well appearing in the Q&A, guys. So if you want to ask Ed a question, drop it in the Q&A, and everybody, even if you don't want to ask a question, you can upvote and comment on questions and all the rest of it. So we ask them in the order you would like to be asked.
Karen, should we go to the next? I think we've probably got a good. I think honestly, when I have mine, I'm going to go for Policy of Truth. I think I like. I really like that suggestion. But if somebody could persuade me about the Charlie XCX track, because that might land a little slight air that I'm not a complete dinosaur. It's slightly more modern, slightly more contemporary, I should say. But should we do the next poll?
Okie dokie, let's do it. Oh yeah, Von Dutch by Charlie XCX apparently, and I think Luke is typing an explanation for a suggestion there. But okie dokie, so the next poll we shall go on to. So this is just a simple choice of 3. So do you think in the advent of AI in society is on balance likely to increase or reduce the pressure on analysts? So increase, decrease, or stay the same? What do you think of that, Ed?
That would the reason I put this in, that I was thinking there's an iron rule that anybody doing a presentation in the modern world has to have a bit of AI. And my talk didn't have any AI on it. And I thought, well, that's a weakness. And then I thought, well, actually, I don't think AI changes this picture; it just intensifies it. So that sort of fits with my kind of prior assumption that those 85%. Yeah. Let's go into some questions, and if you could pick out some questions, can I just ask what I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle through the summaries. So if people want to take a screenshot of the summary which works for them, if they're the roadmap person, and then I'll leave that for a bit, and then I'll move on to the next one and the next one. So can I just check? Are you seeing the roadmap one?
We're seeing summary 1 structure at the minute.
Yeah, that's all right. So for people who like that, I'll put that there. You can do a screenshot, and after a couple of questions, I'll move on to the next one. Which is the examples one, just so if that's the one which worked for you, you've got it there for a bit.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you very much, Ed. Okay, so everybody, if you look in the top bar of Teams, you'll see that there's a Q&A tab. If you click on that, you can submit a question and also react and upvote any one of the questions that have already been asked so far. But I'm going to go to, let's have a look, Fran. Okay, so Fran Biggin asks, how do we, as analysts, avoid giving senior leaders numbers that they can get too focused on? I always give caveats and outline assumptions to analysis, but it's very human for someone to pick up on one number and run with it out of context. Any advice on how to overcome this?
Well, one thing that I would recommend is, when you see that happening, when you see somebody seizing on an individual number, what you could say is, the danger of doing that is that story might become the number, not the story. You know, people might focus in on this number, they start to unpick it and attack it because you made such a big deal of it. You've tried to make it into your killer fact. And all of our evidence suggests is once you start to do that, you kind of you lose the point, and the battleground becomes like the number itself. So much better to have a kind of richer narrative around this rather than fixating on one number. That works better in public communication. So instead of like arguing from the end of like statistical rigor, argue from the end of what makes for trustworthy communication.
Is it? Fantastic. Fran, hope that helps. So the next top upvoted question is from Lisa. And Lisa asks or makes a comment to begin with. In my experience, when we approach something with openness and humility, it's interpreted as a weakness. If we talk about uncertainty and margins of error in our data, the knee-jerk reaction is to look for other data. How do we overcome that? Brilliant question.
Does openness and humility backfire? I would say like in a one-off game, using some game theory here, in a one-off game, it possibly might backfire. If your only interaction ever with your audience, whether they're an internal audience or an external audience, is one saying that you're not, these are some things which are uncertain, or you can use it for this, but you can't use it for that, might undermine people's confidence and lead them to go somewhere. But if it's a repeated game, doing that over and over again enhances your trustworthiness. And that's not just me saying it. There is really good empirical evidence, particularly being done by the Winton Centre at the University of Cambridge, which has tested exactly this. And greater transparency about uncertainty is associated with greater trustworthiness of the communicator. So I'd say stick with it, stick to your guns. It might, in the short run, it might seem less effective, but stick to it, because I think in the long run it will absolutely enhance not just your trustworthiness, but actually your usefulness to the people that you're advising.
Great advice, sticking to your guns. I think that applies to a lot of things in life, doesn't it? Fantastic. Thank you, Ed. So let's have a look. The next top question is from Limes Right, who asks, regarding the misinformation versus careful measured findings point, there's a structural asymmetry. Misinformation spreads because it can flood the zone quickly and emotionally. Careful measured findings can't compete on speed or volume without jeopardizing their trustworthiness. What are those thoughts on this?
Yeah, this bothers me, and I don't have like a crisp answer to this, and I sometimes worry that the sort of the flood the zone with the good stuff argument kind of depends on there being a public sphere that is receptive to that, and there is some evidence that the public sphere is. And some evidence, a lot of evidence, public sphere is changing. And what I mean by that is that a public sphere with a small number of mainstream media institutions that more or less compete with each other in a kind of open market for opinion, that is giving way to a really fragmented public sphere or a series of private spheres where people get their news from and get their sense of what the world is not kind of mediated in the way that it used to be. And there's evidence of this, for example, increasing numbers of people do appear to get their news not from what we would think of as traditional news outlets, but via social media of various kinds. Although against that, there's actually evidence that in a sense the public sphere is not just fragmenting but disappearing, in that people are just accessing news less, just in absolute terms from any source. So I really recognize the concern in this question, but on the other hand, if we believe that the game was up as analysts, if we believe that there's really nothing that we could do, then we might as well not be analysts, right? So I think what we need to do is, I suppose the same as the last question, is stick to our guns and recognize that there are still points and places where there is public deliberation, there is public discourse, and that can be taken seriously. And there are examples where the pre-bunking works and where public communication has withstood this. But I think probably ask me that question in a couple of years' time. I hope my optimism is borne out. But I'm sorry I can't give a more kind of crisp and simple answer to that question, because I do worry about this. I do worry about that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be difficult to give a simple answer to any of these questions because it is such a nuanced subject, isn't it? But thank you for that. Next question is from Emily, and Emily asks, in light of the pushback on levers belonging to machines and not living systems, there's a similar criticism about the ideal of truly independent statistics. What should we aim for, acknowledging there is no observing from outside the system?
Yeah. So the history of statistics, not just official statistics, but statistics as a kind of discipline, that there's a kind of it's like an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. And the angel is all of those foundational statisticians who did amazing things in the 19th century to particularly associated with London for some reason, to kind of understand patterns of poverty, so that by shining a light on poverty, society would become aware of the problem and be able to respond and resolve things. And the stories about cholera outbreaks are really, like part of the poetry of statistics is having that background of like, look at what statistics was able to do. It was able to identify why people were dying from drinking bad water in London. That's what it did. That's the angel. The devil is all of those 19th century and early 20th century statisticians who used statistics to classify, to observe others, and othering of communities, to sort of regard people as being it's a lump of data fallacy. There's fixed objects, people from particular countries or races or backgrounds were either superior or inferior, and we know that in statistics there is that tendency. I think we, as people who are into analysis, absolutely must recognize there is the angel tendency and the devil tendency within our professional kind of histories, and figure out what is it that helps us be on the side of the angels. And I think, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm just giving the same answers of everything, I think it's openness and humility that recognizes we're not like dispassionate, scientific observers, but we're in an engaged conversation with the societies that we're producing an analysis about. I think that helps us rid ourselves of this kind of a devilish distance and technocratic superiority. So openness, humility, the problem is I'm going to give the same answer to everything. So should we just stop? Should we just stop now?
Well, the next question actually might be it's nicely succinctly put, and this is from Adisa Livingston, and she asks, how do you think AI could impact the job market for analysts in government? So a very hot topic. I mean, it's hot for every type of career, I would say, at the minute, but for analysts in government, what do you think?
Well, openness and humility. Funnily enough, my humility here is like, I don't know. I mean, like a few months ago, I thought that agentic AI would take a few years to become quite widespread, and it's just, like the technology is moving faster than most people's capacity to have a kind of proper take and read on it. But what I would say, so there's some stuff that we don't know. I don't know, like what I think the impact would be, but a few things that we do know. One is that there are increasingly powerful AI tools to help with all stages of an analytical work, from the kind of pre-scoping research all the way through to kind of output creation and dissemination. And we know that, and I think that in a sense is the bit of thinking about AI which is augmenting. It can augment the work of analysts, can, I think, help with the grunt work. So that's number one. Number two, we also know that there are very significant risks, and I'm not talking about the kind of Terminator type risks, sort of apocalyptic risks. There are risks like just in any point in that stage, um, over reliance on an AI tool can be problematic, and being aware of the dangers of it, I think, is really significant. The third thing is, like, we're analysts, right? What do we do when we see a problem? We think, well, let's define the problem, let's evaluate it, let's measure it, let's monitor it. One of the things I think is really, really essential, the adoption of AI in analysis or any other part of government, is rigorous evaluation. Not the kind of evaluation which says, these people adopted this tool and we surveyed them and it saved them 26 minutes, and we've multiplied this 26 minutes up and it's like 38 billion pounds, which is like pretty poor analysis, right? But proper rigorous analysis, before and after control groups, those kinds of evaluations, I think, would be really, really helpful. Now, I'm studiously avoiding, do I think there'll be more or less job for analysts in government? And I think Eddie said, my answer is there'll probably be different jobs for analysts in government. I think the job will change.
Yeah,
There you go.
100%. And I think as well as analysts, this audience probably appreciates better than anyone the power of the prompt, and your focus determines your reality, to quote the Phantom Menace as well, is definitely an issue. And I'm sure that people on the call will be delighted to know that we're going to have a new artificial intelligence hub launching on the analysis function this month. So hopefully that's going to be a place that's going to be useful for these kind of questions and debates to take place, and also to find out some prompts that some of your analyst colleagues are using and finding very useful. So we've got time for just a few more questions. So Alex asks, and I can see Alex is tapping into the fact that you really want to talk about openness and humility, Ed. So how can analysts be supported to gain and maintain skills and techniques needed? What needs to be baked into qualifications and learning plans to enable openness and humility to thrive for people? Great question.
It is a lovely question. Just to say, I've put another slide up, which is the links to the things that I mentioned. So the blogs that I talked about, the code of practice, and also actually another really nice report on our website by an academic called Holly Rogers, which is about trust. So if you're wanting to get a good capture on the things I referred to, they're all there on the slide now. What do I think needs to be baked in? I've always felt that the secret sauce of being an analyst in government is not just high quality, rigorous technical skill. I think it's much more about this willingness to engage with deep policy problems, but to do so in a humble way. So I would really want as much of the training, the induction of people when they join any of our professions, be it economics or social research or operational research, to be about the kind of the unique value set that being an analyst in government brings, as it is about technical skills. And actually, I'd emphasize that over leadership. So one of the things which I think is developing in the professions is a focus not just on technical skill, but on leadership. But I'd actually reorientate that towards, from the beginning, you are part of a function, an analysis function in our profession, which has got a culture of openness and humility. These are the examples. These are the get people in to talk about the situations where they have been under pressure and how they've responded. I think those stories, to me, are much more powerful than technical skills alone, or indeed leadership skills alone. So I would start it on day one, and I'd also say that if all of you who are in more senior positions, overseeing people, your responsibility is not just to get the job done, but it's to nurture the next generation into this mindset. So that's what I'd encourage.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left. So, guys, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A if you want to keep upvoting the ones that you'd like us to ask, and then we'll try and get a few more in. So the next one is from Natasha, and she asks, what has changed most in recent years about how trust in statistics and analysis is built, or indeed lost?
Do you know what I'd love to say is that the biggest change was the experience of the pandemic, where there was a period of time when data and analysis of that data was not just the centerpiece of mainstream news, but it was the centerpiece of like I think what lots of people wanted to focus on. Um, One of my pieces of evidence there is a killer fact. I guess I'm falling into my own danger of weaponizing here because I say it a lot, but I'll go for it with the humble acknowledgement that I'm falling into my own trap. 76 unique users in one day of the coronavirus dashboard, or 76 unique visits in one day. That is absolutely amazing that there was that intensity of use. And I remember at the time thinking, this is like really great. I mean, there are some elements of the way analysis and data in the pandemic and used that we didn't think we thought could have been done better. You know, when we championed greater transparency, for example. But this kind of public like engagement with our stuff just seemed really wonderful and really empowering and really energizing. It felt like analysts and data people were kind of the heroes. And I, maybe naively, I thought that was an inflection point. I thought that was going to be a really significant, that we would bank that and build on it. And I don't think that has happened. I think that society has maybe not had that concentration of effort on data analysis. And I don't think it's right for me to lament that, actually. I observe it, but not lament it, because I don't think we should judge what people are interested in. That's not for us to judge. It's for us to observe and react to. So I'd say that felt like it was going to be the biggest change in trust and trustworthiness. But it hasn't been. And I wonder at times whether the wrong lessons were learned. One of the reasons I really rail against dashboards in government is they're so rarely public, and it's like, well, okay, it's fine to have a dashboard on the desk of some important policymaker who can feel like in control of things, but these things really work when they're a public resource that the public can engage with. So I guess I'm waffling a bit. I'll stop there. Nice question. Nice question. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think this is going to be probably the last question we'll have time to bring in. So I'm going to go for Rachel's question. And this is about time, about the pressure element. So time is a pressure or a challenge for me. As part of DAs, we sometimes only have 24 hours with the data until publication. It can lead to quality issues, which decreases trust. Do you have any insight on how to work under pressure when the pressure is time?
So DA being a devolved administration, I'm guessing. That was the bit I didn't quite go to. So if this is one of those scenarios where you get very limited access and then you want to put out devolved administration analysis at the same time as UK level analysis comes out, I think that's the scenario here. I could be wrong. I mean, one thing I would want to, if I was in your shoes, is explore with the UK level data provider, is there any way of giving you more time, right? And be honest about the risk that is entailed for everybody, about the lack of time. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing I'd at least consider is like 2-stage release. Do a high level release that you can be confident in 24 hours, and then do a supplementary release with more detail. I think that might buy you more time. So I think there are probably creative ways around that problem. I think that's what I'd
Well, you get lots of hearts and thumbs up in the reactions for that answer, Ed. So thank you. I think that's really helped quite a lot of people, actually. So I think with your permission, what we'll do is we'll just scoop up all the questions from the Q&A and we'll chuck them across to you, if that would be okay. And we'll see, guys, if we can publish some answers to any of the questions that we haven't managed to address on the analysis function website. But yeah, so thank you so much, Ed. Like I say, we really appreciate you giving your time to this event, and we hope to welcome you back to analysis function events in the future.
Thank you, Karen, for being such a nice chair, such a nice compliment. Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks, guys.